Today we're going to be planting, among other things, and that is Ostrangia. Ostrangia is a beautiful perennial, also known as Hetty's pincushion. It's got root divisions is what I'm planting today, and these grow to about 18 to 20 inches. They like moist soil, so they would really do well at a pond side or near a creek bank or any place that gets a lot of water, maybe a trouble spot for a lot of plants. This likes the water. Doesn't like to sit in the water, but it does like it pretty moist. It also doesn't mind clay soil, so this is a pretty good plant for a lot of trouble areas. And this particular one is a deep Carmen Rose Star of Beauty Ostrangia. These are going to be planted very similar to the way we planted the poppy roots. So let's take a look at one of these plants. There she is. Oh my goodness. All right, you can see there's life here. And what we want to do, according to the directions, we want the crown, and here's the crown, 1 to 2 inches below soil level and 18 inches apart. So here's your crown. Here are your roots, here are your crown, here are your leaves. 1 to 2 inches. This would be the crown. You can see where it was coming up out of the ground. So I want to plant it about that deep. You can see the crown. It's 1 to 2 inches below the soil. These are the Pauline Violet Ranunculus corms. As you can see, they're just all dried up and shriveled, and it looks like they're dead. So we're going to reinvigorate them by soaking them in a pot of water for several hours. I think one of the loveliest things about being a home gardener, gardening simply for the pleasure of gardening, is the journey that it takes you on. Because you are nurturing these plants sometimes from the very moment that they come out of the seed packet. It's such a pleasure to see the little islands of green cropping up all over the black earth of your garden. And if you've been gardening for any length of time, you recognize everybody. They're like little family members or old friends. Some of them you planted when they were just tiny seeds, or maybe you sprinkled some in your garden, some seed in your garden, and lo and behold, you see these little seedlings cropping up everywhere. It's just such a joy. Here are the roots of the oriental poppies that I planted in the last video, and just look at the beautiful healthy green that's sprouting up in the top. All of them look like this. Look at the astilbes. These were astilbes that I split up a large astilbe last year into 8 different sections, and it gave me 8 separate plants for this garden. So everything in your garden is generally a labor of love. And if you plant a garden simply for pleasure, for beauty, for your family, you know what I'm talking about. It's such a unique and wonderful way to watch life, to see the miracle of seeds and growth and roots. Look at the roses coming up here, the buds coming out of these were bare root roses 2 weeks ago. And now little plants are everywhere in this section. So that is something to be so thrilled about and very happy to see it. Sometimes things don't work out, and sometimes things work out just really, really beautifully, or you learn a lesson from your planting, something you never would have known if you don't possibly kill a plant, or maybe it's not thriving as it should. But gardening is just one of the most wonderful things. Or, and I'll say it again, gardening is like creating your own little Garden of Eden on your own little plot, or your large plot, whatever kind of plot you've got, even if it's a window box. Gardening is just a really wonderful gift. These are always a good thing too. I swear I don't remember planting yellow tulips anywhere, but here they are. I know that I stuffed this old wash bucket full of bulbs in the fall, didn't even know what they were, but here they come. And look at all the little red leaves coming out on this climbing rose. These are always something to be thrilled about. But not everything is a success, but you can learn from that and be glad for that too. Let me show you one of my failures. I think that by now I'd be smarter than my free-range chickens, but last week I absolutely wasn't. I left the gate to the potager open. 5 little hens came in and proceeded to dig up all the green peas that were in this row because I didn't have them covered anymore. Fortunately, I had more peas in the pack, so I was able to replant them, and I can see that they're coming up again, except this time they're covered up. So you just have to be smarter than your free-range chickens, and sometimes I'm not. That's embarrassing to admit. Now, someone just asked me in one of the comments this week, what do I do about my free-range chickens destroying the garden? And I've mentioned this many times. You just have to be smarter than your chickens, and sometimes that's not easy. You just have to put up barricades to protect your plants. If you have free-range birds, there's a price to be paid, and you don't want to pay a too steep a price. So this is simply a raised bed with wire over the top of it. They can't get in there, they can't dig anything. They're not interested in the plants, they're only interested in that soil. So once these spinaches get much bigger and fuller, that soil will be covered. The chickens won't even care about it anymore. And this is in the potager, which is fenced in, but they do have a way of sneaking in every once in a while. Simply no way the chickens can scratch in these old chicken feeders. So these chicken feeders are actually protecting my plants instead of feeding my chickens. The thing that chickens love to do is get into one of your pots. If it's a big enough pot that their body can squeeze in there, believe me, they will do it. So in order to protect my ranunculus corms that are in these big pots, I have to cover them. I have to hide them from the chickens. Whether you have to make a piece of netting to put over the top, whatever it may be, the plants will grow right through this, and when they're tall enough, you can remove these barriers because, like I said, chickens aren't interested in the plants. At least mine aren't. They're just interested in the soil. Something high up off the ground, such as this trough that I showed you earlier with the sweet peas planted, and also some garden seeds are in here. Even this has to be protected from chickens. It may be 3 feet up off the ground, but it doesn't matter. They'll hop right up in here and dig this whole thing up if they get a chance. So even this has to be covered with garden wire. But the plants will grow right up through it, and it actually gives them a lot of support as they're growing. So, and I don't think it's unattractive. It's garden wire. Even the pot is not safe from your chicken, even though it's up off the ground. They like nothing more than a nice cozy little pot for them to personally plug away in and do as much cultivating as they want. The soil would be all over the courtyard and everywhere but in the pot. So I have to do something with this pot as well. Now, in this pot are planted 3 Natal dahlias. They are a burgundy crimson pompon. It's going to take a while for those to get going. And along the edges here, I'm planting a Tom Thumb black velvet nasturtium to tumble over the sides. In the meantime, I have nothing but very inviting black soil, so I'm going to have to do something about that. In the case of this pot, I have this really great old implement from an old cultivator, cast iron cultivator, which I don't know where it came from, but it really works great. It's not going to interfere with any of the growth in there. It's too heavy for the chickens to move, and conveniently, the green color of it actually matches this pot, which I think is really great. Don't toss away your broken china or your broken plates and bowls. Use them in your garden. So if you just place these all around your plant in a pot, or even in the garden, you can also place these around your garden plants that are planted straight into the soil surface. But this works pretty well. This is planted around a climbing rose, which also has a rose support, which also keeps the chickens out. And eventually I'll be able to move all these pieces as the little plants that I planted underneath here start to grow around the rose. We have a lovely little dwarf peach tree planted in a pot, and all around the outside base of the tree I've put in bedding plants, little pansies here. I've planted them as closely together as I could, but even so there are still some spaces showing. A few pieces of crockery wouldn't hurt to discourage the chickens in there until these plants flesh out a little bit better. But generally, the chickens are not going to be interested in a pot like this. As in this particular rose, they were a little more sparse, so I did put a lot of broken pots all around. You're in the way, Titus, and where does your collar go? This is the second collar that Titus has lost. But the rose is in the center, and all around are the pansies, or whatever other little annual you want to put. But the crocs are keeping the chickens out of the pot. In the meantime, here's another one. This is another rose, but you can see that it's pretty much protected because it's got a very nice, tall, needles that are coming up out of the ground. I don't want the chickens digging around them with all this bare soil. I just protect them with these metal hanging baskets that I buy for this purpose, actually. And also, here's some more hanging baskets upside down, protecting these purple oriental poppies that I put in just a few days ago. So here in the Beatrix Potter patch, I always use a woven fence. I have circle all the way around the garden, but because that little fence would not keep the chickens out, they'll hop right on top of it, jump over, I am forced to use my garden fencing once again on the outside of it. It doesn't really ruin the effect of the wattle fence because from a few feet away you can't even see the garden fencing. But chickens, they don't jump over this. I don't know why. They could fly right over it, but they don't seem to know that, and so they don't. They don't like wire tops like this, and they don't fly over it. But here's another garden that is really giving me a thrill because, once again, we pretty much started this garden from scratch last year, with the exception of a few perennials that were always here. So what I'm seeing coming up now are either returning plants from last year or brand new plants that I put in this year. And I want to take the opportunity as I'm standing here in front of this patch to talk a little bit about something I've mentioned many times in the garden, and that is repeat planting. So with repetition planting, what I'm talking about is repeating the plants in a garden space throughout the space to give it continuity and a sense of balance. Now the way you do that is by choosing maybe 10 plants. Maybe you've got 10 plants in your garden. So you want to repeat those plants. So let's just, for example, say over there in that corner we have 3 foxglove. And repeated them. In the other corner we have 3 more foxglove. We have sedum here, and we have sedum here, and here. Clusters of alliums. Clusters, clusters, clusters of alliums, repeating throughout the garden in sections. I like to do it usually in 3s. Here we have the oriental poppies planted 1, 2, 3, 4 in this section. And we've repeated them again in the center of the garden, and then I've repeated them again, 3 sets of them, right over there on the other edge. I've done the same thing with peonies, phloxes, and bee balm in the back. Also, there are roses in this garden. So there are 1, 2, 3 roses. 1 is in the front, a short shrub, and 2 climbers going up against the shed here. So this will all turn out in the end to be very soothing, peaceful, and exuberant at the same time, but very balanced garden. Iron fence encircles the front yard garden, but they could slip right through there if it weren't for the garden fencing behind it. And once again, they don't jump on top of this skinny wire, and they don't fly over it. Now, I don't know what your chickens are like, but mine just don't do it. I guess I'm lucky. Mine don't seem to understand that they can fly. Now this is a border just full of grape hyacinth or muscari. And when it's this full and it just looks like a lot of grass, this is just entangled muscari all throughout here. And I let it stay here because it keeps the birds from digging in here, and because the muscari is basically protecting the Canterbury bells that are nestled among these grasses. So really, you don't have much to worry about in this bed. Another barrier just placed over one of the planters with cilantro and chives growing in it, and I've just put a piece of cast iron, I don't know what it is, but it works. It works very well to keep them out of this particular garden. Well, those are just a few ideas of how to keep your chickens from destroying your garden. Now, if your chickens live in a nice little chicken coop, more power to you. But mine don't. They live in that great big barn right there, and they come out the front door and they just go wherever they want to. And so they do have a lot of freedom. And I don't have the hassle of putting them away at night in the coop and locking them up. I just have the hassle of keeping them out of the garden. This is an old galvanized wash tub that I keep on the back courtyard, and I often put bulbs in it, but last year I just sprinkled seed in here to see what would come up. So in this case we have a whole bed full of little pink primroses ready to go into any garden that I want. So here they are. I'm just starting to dig them up. As you can see, they've got nice little roots here, but generally I'll just get a big clump of them like this and pop them in another garden. And then I will reseed this with something else. So this is just another way of growing your plants without having to use grow lights and all the potting paraphernalia that you usually need. But this is done right outside. And so here I have a nice big chunk of primroses, whoops, ready to plant in any garden that needs a very short little perennial. This is goes about 10 inches, 12 inches tall. Be great in the front of a border. This other galvanized old water trough. This is just wonderful and huge. And I'm about ready to put some sweet peas in here. These are sweet peas that I had put in, I think, back in January. It's taken them this long. They have gone through all sorts of horrible temperatures, but they have maintained. And they're still pretty short, but they're still here. So I'm going to pop some sweet peas in the back of this bed, and then I'm going to use the front of it. Now the last thing we'll want to check out today will be the nursery beds that we planted outside a few weeks ago. And I'm just going to open this one here with some of the the coneflower seeds that I collected from my own plants last year. You can take a look at these little seeds and you can see that they just look like little dried husks, like they just blow away in the wind. It's like there's nothing to it. You can't even imagine that anything would develop out of this, let alone a huge coneflower plant. But if you take a look at these tiny, tiny seedlings that are coming up, and I did scarcely sprinkle this one with seeds, but you can take a look at this and look at, there's that little dried husk, and coming out of that little dried husk was this wonderful little seedling. Isn't that amazing? So that little plant right there grew out of that little dried out husks. That's just such a miraculous thing when you think about seeds. I'm simply in love with seeds and the life they produce. And, you know, think about these things when you're planting. This nursery bed, I deliberately did it very sparsely because coneflowers can get pretty large, and I like to transplant them when they're a decent size, so I wanted a lot of room in here. But I see that I still have several empty spaces where the seeds did not germinate, so I'm going to sprinkle a couple more seeds in there. They'll be a little bit behind the others, but that's okay. You can do this in chapters. And put this back outside. Just brought it in to film it because it's actually so bitter cold outside. And we're going to go out and look at some of the other nursery beds that we planted and see how they did. Now in this bin we have some rather slow germinators. This is Cresspedia, an annual, also known as Billy Buttons. Billy Buttons. There's another one where you can see how it's escaped. The leaves have escaped from that little seed. I think that is so interesting. Unleashed the lids of the lupin, and they're looking pretty good. They've been staying pretty moist in their boxes. So I'm going to seal these back up again and probably be ready to plant these right into the garden in a couple weeks. That was a failure, and I know why. It's because I allowed it to dry out. I did not have a proper seal around the edge to keep it airtight and allow the condensation to keep going in there, and the soil just dried out, and all I got were two little tiny plants right here, 1 and 2, but that is okay. I am going to see how dry I let that soil get. This is my fault, and perhaps I should have mentioned that in the video, that the sides needed to be tightened up a little bit better than I did this year. But all I'm going to do is get this nice and wet, add some more seeds, close up the box, and try it again. So the Rocky Mountain Columbine and the Blue Sage right here have germinated very nicely, very prolifically, and now that they've germinated, they'll really take off. And in just a very short time, these will be turned to either pot up, pot, or put right in the garden, which I prefer just to put them in the garden. Because they've been outside in all the weather, they are already hardened off, and they don't need any special treatment other than going right into the garden. Where I go, I have chicken friends. Hello, ladies. I don't mind you being on the slope, and you can't do anything to the nursery beds because they have lids on them. So we're A-okay. I checked most of them. Most of them were just fine, and didn't have to open anything and reseal it. But do check yours, make sure they're still moist inside, because if they're not, those seedlings will not germinate or survive. Now, I think it's time for a cup of tea. We'll have a nice hot cup of tea. This is English breakfast tea, but it's great for the late afternoon as well. Nice and hot, because it's rather brisk and cool outside today. And this is by Harney & Sons, as usual. So cheers. And I think we'll go say hello to the donkeys. Good girls. Pretty girls. All right. What have we got? We got some onions. have lots of extra carrots today. There you go. All right. Lucky ladies. Lucky, lucky ladies. See you next time in Hopalong Hollow. Bye-bye. Yeah, girls.